Good evening, everyone. This is the Reiche Building Level Advisory Committee. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. It is November 19th. I almost didn't remember which month we're in, but it is indeed November. It is 5:32 p.m. and we are meeting via Zoom. I am going, as I have done in previous months, I'm going to take attendance as we go so that I can capture everyone who joins us throughout the meeting. And just a reminder that it's often good to use the raise your hand function if you have a question, but we are fairly informal. So if you prefer to raise your hand or just come off mute if I don't see you or Mark doesn't see you, please just go ahead and do that. I did not remember seeing minutes, but let me look back.
They're there.
They are there?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, yes, I see. Does anyone have any feedback on the minutes from our last meeting? And that was on October 22nd. Okay. Is there a motion to approve the minutes from our last meeting? Someone?
I so move.
Thank you, Judy. And is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Francesca. Okay, all in favor of approving the minutes from our last meeting, please indicate. Terrific. So I see it unanimous with perhaps Councillor Thibodeau abstaining because he wasn't in attendance. Okay, excellent. Terrific. Well, I'm so happy that we're back together today. I am going to, as is customary, hand it over to Mark and Lisa. Sorry, Lisa, I didn't see you yet, to take us through the agenda. So thank you so much, Mark, Lisa.
Very good. If someone, I think, can allow me to share my screen or make me a co-host. There we go. Excellent. All right. So I think everyone should be able to see my screen. Tell me if that's the case.
We can see it.
Excellent. All right. I do not, for whatever reason, can see the video of various people. So if you have your hand up, I'll look on the panelist list, or somebody can audibly say, and I'll pause. And the chairs can ask the question. So moving into our agenda for tonight, since our last meeting, BLAC meeting, we have had an election, and there's also a referendum question for the city of Portland, which you can see is our point of conversation this evening. And so really, we were gearing up, I think, as everyone remembers, as sort of one of our last kind of steps to get to the bidding of the project, and we've taken a pause in this, and that's really going to be the focus of kind of our conversation tonight. We've kind of taken a pause to understand the applicability of the referendum, particularly the Green New Deal, to the project itself, and sort of help explain that. I think some folks may have seen a newspaper article that covered some of the conversations that we had last week with the DABC, and so that was reported on. I can't remember if it was this morning or yesterday morning, but so that's out there and been in the press. And then we're going to talk about sort of the next steps, kind of in the state right now where we're paused, and what that what that means for the project, and then we'll move to some question and answers, and then we'll adjourn the meeting. And so the conversation about the passing of the Green New Deal and what it entailed, and I think we may have covered some of this in our previous meeting too, and I won't spend a lot of time on it, but I think it's important to understand what the elements of the Green New Deal are and how they apply to the project, or how they may apply to the building project. And so it really can be kind of sorted into two different areas. One is, how does it apply to the construction of the project and the contractor's requirements, and the other one is, how does it apply to the design of the project and the scope that we're trying to design to. And so with respect to the construction, there's the requirement that the contractors hire a certain percentage of the workforce as apprentices. And there are certain percentages that are given, and it is a coordination with those that are available through what's known at the Department of Labor. So that's one requirement that the project didn't anticipate having contractors have to comply. So, and it's, we're not certain how many that is, and if it says the entire project, I think, is the way that the language is written, but there's a certain percentage of that would have to. So a lot of the trades, whether it's the electrical contractor or the mechanical contractor, there's an apprenticeship program. This just stipulates how many apprentices they have to staff the project with. The other component is that the project needs to comply with wage rates that state and local fair wage rates. And I think everyone may recall that we were moving in this direction after we had a conversation on the first of the BFOF projects, the LICEF project. And so we were already complying with this new requirement of the Green Building Code. So that one isn't going to have an impact on the project. And then the third requirement under the Green New Deal was that employees, the contractors' employees, undergo OSHA training, and most contractors require that of their workforce anyway, and so we don't see that as a significant burden to the project. So those are the pieces of the Green New Deal that apply to the construction portion of the project. The pieces that comply, or that the design are applicable to, are largely around energy considerations. And so the first is that the requirement of the project to exceed the energy code by 25% for renovations. And so and the big difference that is already built into the Green Building Code. But the big difference with the Green New Deal is that they suggest that the version of the energy code that we're using has to be the latest published version of the energy code. And so the current requirement before that, or I should say the requirement before the Green New Deal, was a 2010 version of that energy code. And the most recently published standard is the 2019 version of that energy standard. So there's a big difference between the 2010 and the 2019 versions of that. And so that is a significant difference in if the Green New Deal applies to the project. That's a significant difference. And again, that means that it requires a better envelope of the building and better mechanical systems, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. The next piece is that there's a requirement for better roofs, that it comply with the Better Roofs program, which means that you have to set aside 15% of your roof area of the building to be solar ready. Or you can, instead of it being solar ready, you could also have it be a vegetative roof. So it would actually have a planted material on the roof. And one of the considerations would be to look at whether or not we would need to do any level of structural upgrade either now or in the future to accommodate a solar project. Another consideration with that is whether or not the most recently agreement with the city to purchase solar electricity may even allow us to use that to comply with that component of the Green New Deal. And one of the other considerations we were looking at is sort of the applicability of the Green New Deal. And so now that it has passed, it was a positive passing vote on it. When does it take effect? And the ordinance, the city ordinance suggests that any changes that are citizen initiated take effect within 30 days of the certification of the vote. And so I want to say that the vote was November 2nd, I think, or 3rd. 3rd, I think it was a Tuesday. So it's 30 days from that calendar days that after that time is when the new Green New Deal would take effect. And then there was a question from the applicability standpoint, was there any language that says that the project could potentially be exempt from that? And we didn't think there was much in the way of the way that the ordinance are written, that the director of planning can look at a technical feasibility issue to exempt a project. So that was one consideration, although we don't know that there's any strong reason technically that we couldn't comply. And so that brought us to a little more research into some of the details of it. And so the first question was, is it reaching out to legal counsel to understand, is it applicable? And so that's the first issue. And honestly, we're still looking at that a little bit, and we'll have a little more information on that in a minute, perhaps. The next piece is that the ordinance applies to new construction and renovation of city-owned buildings, and so that are funded or used by city. And then the renovation consideration, there's a couple standards for that, but one of them looks at assessed value of the properties, and it also looks at the value of the construction. And if the value of the construction is under the fair market value, assessed value of the property, then it's not considered a renovation. It's considered less than a renovation. So there's a threshold of whether or not the building costs, the construction cost, exceed the fair market value. Another consideration is that the requirements, the energy requirements, apply if the change in the code was with the Green New Deal was that it was 10,000 square feet if projects that are 10,000 square feet or larger, and that threshold was lowered to 5,000 square feet. And so that's the threshold that we now then have to comply with the better roofs and the energy requirements. And so those are the sort of important parts of it, the 5,000 square feet, of which there's an interpretation of whether that's 5,000 square feet of total construction or just 5,000 square feet of new construction. And I think thinking about Reiche, we actually have less than 5,000 square feet of new construction, but our total project is certainly larger than 5,000 square feet. On the assessed value for Reiche, originally what we were looking at was the tax assessment of the property, not the fair market value. And through some of the conversation with the assessment office and legal counsel, it's actually determined that we're likely the construction cost is less than the fair market value of Reiche. And so in some ways that suggests that not only the Green New Deal is not applicable, but that the Green Building Code is not applicable, because ultimately what it means is our threshold for renovation, this does not meet the threshold for sort of what their determination or their definition of renovation is. And so that is sort of newer sort of information that we're researching right now. So while I don't believe we have a formal evaluation of the property, we're I think fairly clear, certain we have some opinion that the fair market value is indeed more than construction value. So so I think that right now is not necessarily a big question mark in our mind. We're fairly certain that as I said, that the construction value is lower than the fair market value, and therefore really the conversation about this doesn't apply to Reiche. So that's I guess important to understand for this group, this building committee, because it's different for Longfellow and Presumpscot, where Longfellow and Presumpscot, the fair market value is right now not determined to be above the construction costs. So I'll pause for a moment here.
Mark, I don't know if you can see me, but could I ask a question? It's Emily.
Yeah, Emily. Yep.
Thanks. If I didn't realize the second part of this, that the green, even the green building code might not apply to the project. Are there changes that, I mean, we know resources are very tight. I think we all also want this to be a fairly green building. Are there changes that we might look at in order to maximize the improvement we're making to the educational spaces as a result?
Yeah, I think that thank you, Emily. That the question is right now, as I think everyone knows, we were sort of following the current, I guess, on the books green building code, which we were also doing LEED silver, and so we were tracking the points. I think everyone remembers we've kind of reported on that. And what we've been doing is looking at where we draw the boundary of that LEED requirement, and we think that the threshold for us in looking at LEED is such that I don't know that there's a tremendous delta between the cost to comply with that LEED silver and not. There is some, but we haven't determined what that delta is to appreciably change the scope and take that and reinvest it in some other area.
Thank you. Are there other questions? Councillor Thibodeau.
I was just going to ask if the 15% for either the green roof or the vegetation or the solar would apply. What does that even look like? And then I thought just a comment on the purchase agreement that we did at the city level for renewables. I would definitely be interested to learn a little bit more about that as well. But just contextually, 15% of the Reiche roof is what? Is it like the outdoor space kind of on the second floor, or what's that even look like?
Yeah, that's a good. I'm trying to think of approximately the total footprint of it, but it is a relatively small area, and the ordinance says that it has to be able to receive. So it means that it cannot be in shade, and so that's really the biggest aspect of it. And I would suggest that the area of the connector is probably a little more than 15%, but not by a significant amount. So that's actually kind of an interesting way of visualizing it. But again, the requirement of the Green New Deal is that the 15% just be ready to receive solar, and it applies to the roof, and it says your electrical room has to be ready to receive equipment. So it's not again a very onerous at this level, but again, that's what the Green New Deal requirement is. We know that the Green New Deal doesn't apply to Reiche, so that's the other consideration. Okay. Moving on. So again, the scenario that we were looking at on all three schools was, does it apply to all areas of all three schools? Does it apply to all areas of two schools, which is Longfellow and Presumpscot, assuming that Reiche, it didn't apply to Reiche, either because of a threshold of 5,000 square feet or because of, as we know now, that the assessed value. And then there's another scenario of, if it applies to Longfellow and Presumpscot only, is it just to the new areas of Longfellow and Presumpscot, or is it to the entire school of that? So that's scenarios 2 and 3. What it would mean if it were applying it for, we would have to upgrade the envelope and the mechanical system to comply with the higher energy amounts or energy performance that the Green New Deal spells forward. And we're starting to look at a rough order of magnitude of what that cost would be. And if it had applied to Reiche, we assume, because the envelope it's the larger of the three schools the building itself, it'd have to comply, not simply the new additions in a worst case scenario. And so a worst case scenario would have been $2.5 million additional amount for Reiche. Again, we know now that that's not going to be the case, but that's what it would have been. And $1.5 million for the existing school envelope and mechanical system for Presumpscot, and another $2 million for the existing envelope and mechanical system for Longfellow. So if you add those up, the construction cost of those was $6 million, which I think is what was reported in the article in the Press Herald. And I'll pause here. I think there's a question.
I have a question. I don't know if it's me you're referring to. What impact does all of this have on the Reiche building budget?
So right now, there's a couple, I guess, ways of maybe looking at that. If we hold to the scope, now that we know that the Green Building Code does not apply to Reiche, if we hold to the original scope of work, and we don't, and there's no funds that are redistributed, and again, that's the question we're going to have to look at is, are there additional costs to the other schools, and how are those costs considered? But assuming again that that the Green New Deal and the Green Building Code do not apply to Reiche, then there's no change in the cost to Reiche.
Mark, does the rough order of magnitude include labor costs as well?
Yes, yeah. So those were sort of looking at construction values of insulating the exterior envelope of the building, new windows and new insulation on the outside of the building, and even a new skin, what I call skin, a new facade material, and mechanical equipment for the building. And so those include both materials and labor costs. Again, that was conceived of if it applied, worst case scenario, to all three schools. And so as we have subsequently learned, again, that's not applicable. So there is no $2.5 million needed for right now. It's not a requirement for the Reiche. Okay. All right. So whoops, let me, yeah, so one of the other considerations, and again, the information we're presenting to you tonight was information we presented to the DABC. And so this again looked at the question of whether or not the ordinance applied and if there was any grandfathering that occurred. And again, as I said, this does not in some ways apply to Reiche. So I won't dwell on this slide. Where we were prior to the pause was that we were looking at going through the completion of the design, preparing our documents to submit to the planning board, which occurred in the fall. submitting to the planning board, and then submitting our building permit, and then bidding the project to contractors. And so we were conceiving of a staggered schedule of bids where the first school would go out in December. The second one would go out in January, and the third one would bid in February. And so when we paused to look at the applicability of the Green New Deal, this schedule got sort of put on hold a little bit, with the exception of we still applied for the planning board submission. So the projects have been submitted to the planning board. And so we're sort of following that. But one of the things that we also paused was going out to pre-qualify general contractors to submit on the projects. And what we will now, understanding Reiche's understanding of the fact that the Green Building Code does not apply to Reiche, but we're going to, and also understanding a little bit more about some of the language, we're probably going to move into that and pick that back up again and begin the pre-qualification process for the contractors. But the timing of the bids we'll have to re-examine, because we've lost a few weeks here, about a month right now, in our completion of the documents. We presented the information to the school board and got the following feedback. And so so some of the questions were, can we expedite the review in order to be grandfathered? And also, can we get a formal interpretation of the ordinance's impact? And we have done that, and we've determined again that part of that review was also looking at the applicability for the Reiche project. Can we consider moving forward with Reiche under the assumption that the changes won't apply to that school? And the outcome of that conversation was that we were also waiting to understand if the other projects would be impacted and how any of their impacts may impact the Reiche scope. And so that there was no determination made on moving forward or not moving forward with Reiche. And then there was also a request that the school department contact the city council and the mayor to look at the question of, could the implementation not apply to these projects, or could it be postponed? Because there was some conversations about a postponement or perceived postponement of some of the wage referendum, but I think we've also seen response to that, and so there was a reach out, but there is no possible legal way of postponing, and there's no authority on the part of the city council or the mayor to be able to do that. And then there was DABC. As I said last week, we presented to the DABC, and we got some discussion from them. Is there the possibility to defer some of this work while alternate financing is worked out? So again, if there was additional cost, could we just do some of that energy work? Could we defer that work until we could figure out how we're going to pay for that? And that was still a potential consideration. The next possibility was, is there a possibility that once you've submitted to planning and paid your invoice, you are considered in the process and may be exempt from the ordinances? And we're actually looking very, very carefully, the school department's legal counsel is looking at very carefully at that, and the consideration that there may be the ability that once you have submitted to planning, that you are indeed considered in the process, and you would be only subject to the existing green building code, not the new green building ordinance. And so, again, Reiche is somewhat different because it doesn't apply to this project, but this was, again, a broader conversation on aspects of the Green New Deal as it related to the BFOF projects. The council...
Sorry, if I can interrupt you just for a second. I want to say, again, I have to jump off for a finance committee meeting that is starting now. I apologize for leaving the meeting, but thank you so much. And perhaps Councillor Thibodeau can take over any facilitation that's needed. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. The third bullet point, I think we already addressed, and that was that we found out that indeed there is no ability to delay the referendum. So that was that came forward loud and clear. The next bullet point is there language stipulating what happens if contractors can't physically meet the workforce percentage requirements, and there's no language in the ordinance that says what happens if they can't. And then if assuming that we were on pause for a period of time because we had to redo the scope of the projects and we had to delay them, what would be the impact of delaying bidding the project? So let's say instead of bidding it this winter, we went to bid in the summer, and so there is construction inflation. So and we've already witnessed that, as we all recall, back when we had to redo the scope of the work and what exactly we were going to be able to undertake with this project. There was a big conversation about how much we lost in the value of because construction costs were escalating so much in the last several years, and so that's still a very real aspect of the longer you wait to undertake a project, the more you incur for escalation costs, and so there would be some potential construction inflation, which means that the cost would go higher and we'd have to remove more scope of work. So then there was also consideration, could there be challenges from an aggrieved party? So that means would someone say, if somehow we got around a requirement, that somebody would litigate and say, and bring it to court, say, we don't agree with that. And so yeah, there could be, and I think the lawyer said anyone can consider if there's pretty low threshold to file a suit. So somebody could essentially challenge something. So the next bullet point was, when do we decide when we do decide to resume the work? When do we make that decision about starting back up again? And I think that is a conversation that we're still having ongoing conversations with the lawyers in terms of the applicability of this statute, but we think that we've got a lot more clarity now than we did even a week ago, and so I think we'll be able to answer that question very shortly and update everyone as to where we are with the schedule and being back on track. And so I think by our next meeting, which is, I think right now still scheduled in December, we'll have a much better sense of what this means to the schedule. And then there was a conversation about why did we stop the pre-qualification process, and the simple answer to that is we had stopped the pre-qualification process, and we can talk a little bit about what that means in a minute here, but we stopped the pre-qualification of general contractors because we were looking to pre-qualify contractors for one or any of the three projects, Reiche, Longfellow, and Presumpscot. So we were pausing because we didn't know when we would be bidding the Longfellow and Presumpscot projects, as well as if there was an impact on any of the projects itself. So the consideration now is that as I said earlier, we're actually looking to restart the pre-qualification process, and what that process is we will solicit contractors to submit their qualifications to undertake one or any of the projects. They'll send in information about their bonding capacity, their timeliness to complete projects. They'll also provide similar projects to this that they have done, and there'll be a process of reviewing them to determine if we feel that they are qualified to be able to do this work. So that's the pre-qualification process, and it takes several weeks to do that, and so we're going to undertake that in the short amount of time. Any questions on this so far? Okay. So I'm going to turn it over to my trusted colleague here, Lisa Sawin, to go through kind of where we were with next steps, so we can kind of understand where we were when we paused the project. And like I said, I think this one was what we were doing in this pause. But Lisa, I'll let you take it from here. I think Lisa's here. Hang on.
I have to unmute myself. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Excellent. I was saying to myself, but it was meant for all of you, good evening and great to see everyone. So the next steps, and really it's more of the active steps, as Mark said, is we essentially paused to evaluate the impact to the current scope at each school. And as you've heard, it's evolving, and we're learning new things almost daily as to how it impacts the schools. And so that's kind of the active step one that we've been engaging in with multiple stakeholders, and then step two, review options with DABC. And so a lot of this is, if it applies to all of the schools, what does that mean? And these are really hypothetical at this point, with not knowing what the implications are. But a couple scenarios that have been put out there is, are there delays of all 3 schools for a hypothetical time period of, let's say, 6 months? Or are we delaying one school 6 months and others longer? And really, this is kind of just things that we were putting out on the table as we were collecting information to understand this impact. So by no means are we necessarily doing these. These are just things that we're exploring parallel with finding out all the facts on the impact of the Green New Deal. And depending on the impact, one of the steps might be redesigning the projects, depending again on the impact and how much scope may be required to comply with that. But as you're hearing that at Reiche, that may not be the case at all. Again, these are kind of, it's a fluid process, and we have all the balls going at the same time to make sure that we can react as quickly as possible as we find out the information and be able to determine what is needed at each of these schools and what our steps are going forward from there. And then for upcoming meeting dates, DABC meets again on December 17th, and the BLACs, we will need to look at rescheduling because they fall right on that holiday time period. So I think we'll have to explore when our next meeting date is and get that information out to all of the BLACs. I think that might be it, Mark. We can open up for any questions.
Does anyone have any questions? Members of the committee at all?
I do. I'm assuming this all means that no design issues have been considered at all since the election but I'm wondering, one of the things we talked about last time that someone raised was trying to enliven the front entrance design-wise and make it more child-friendly and exciting. And I was just wondering if there had been any progress on that in that area.
Yeah, so there's a couple things that have been going on that have actually taken place since our last meeting, and one of the things that actually ties in with enlivening the whole front entrance was also a conversation with the landscape group, and so there's been a couple meetings now with the landscape group, and part of the conversation has also been how to integrate and potentially look at the design of the entrance elements and how to make them integrated more both into the work that's going on with the landscaping, as well as to your point, to enliven it with sort of a aspect that is appropriate for an elementary school.
Have you considered just the use of color?
We're looking at material and color as some important considerations that may actually be really great, fun ways of taking even the current design and enlivening it. So absolutely.
Super. Thank you.
Any other questions from anyone else? I guess just the kind of Cliff Notes overview. I guess I always like to kind of dial it down to if somebody asked me on the street what's going on. The update is that it does not appear that this Green New Deal applies to the Reiche project based on our initial review, and that we see no significant impact to the budget if that is correct. And then finally, the question about, so when are we getting started and how does this impact the other projects, would be that we're going to assess the projects as a whole, since they were going to be submitted as a whole. But that one of the steps could be that because Reiche is not impacted, that it may it may proceed on a different track. Is that a fair review of what you said?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd sort of say that the last point of the timing is still probably the one that's vaguest in terms of the impact right now. But absolutely, I think you've captured it pretty well, and you did it in 30 seconds, and I think it took me a half an hour. So, Councilor Thibodeau, you're hired.
Yeah. Right. Anyone else have any follow-ups or things that we feel like, maybe that we've missed here on kind of next steps? Because I know we talked a lot about impact, but just on next steps, where we go from here, sounds like you all are going to get back to us with a time for December and or early January, right, depending upon where, if there's a holiday.
Right. Exactly. And even if there isn't, I think everyone wants to make their own holiday, right? So, so yeah, we'll poll the group and get in touch with the co-chairs and figure out what the right timing is.
Okay.
I appreciate your time tonight, everyone. Thank you for taking the time and getting up to speed here.
Thank you, everyone. Good seeing everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Take care.